Commander Ryan Torres gripped the cold metal railing of the observation deck as his salvage vessel slowly approached the impossible structure floating in the darkness. His knuckles were white from the pressure. The station just hung there in the void between arms, spinning slowly like a ghost ship from some forgotten nightmare. This region of space was supposed to be empty. Nothing lived out here. Nothing survived out here. Yet there it was, defying everything he knew about the universe. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of the ship's engines and the occasional beep from the sensor arrays. Ryan had been doing salvage work for 15 years, pulling apart dead ships and abandoned stations for parts and data. He'd seen strange things before. Alien artifacts, derelict warships, even the remains of colonies that died from disease or starvation. But this was different. This felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. Lieutenant Beth Morris, his science officer, stood at her station with her eyes glued to the readouts. Her face was pale in the blue glow of the monitors. She'd been running scans for the past 20 minutes, and each result seemed to confuse her more than the last. "Commander, those energy signatures are ancient," Beth said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at him with wide eyes. "We're talking pre-contact era. Maybe older. Way older." Ryan nodded slowly, his mind trying to process what that meant. Pre-contact era was before humanity joined the galactic community, back when Earth was isolated and alone. That was centuries ago. The technology from that time was primitive compared to what they had now. So how was this station still running? How old are we talking? Ryan asked. Beth shook her head. "The computer can't give me an exact date. The power system running that thing uses technology we don't even have in our databases. It's like finding a working steam engine on a starship." Ryan stared at the station through the viewport. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon. The hull was covered in symbols and markings that looked almost like ancient Earth writing, but not quite. The metal was pitted and scarred from thousands of years of micrometeorite impacts. Solar panels, cracked and dusty, still caught the faint light from distant stars. "Take us in," Ryan ordered. "Carefully." The helmsman nodded and guided their ship toward the nearest docking port. The salvage vessel moved like a cautious animal approaching something it didn't understand. Ryan assembled his boarding team quickly. 6 people, all experienced, all armed with basic weapons just in case. They suited up in their environment gear and passed through the airlock. The moment Ryan stepped onto the station, he felt the weight of age pressing down on him. Dust covered every surface, so thick that their boots left clear prints behind them. The air was stale and cold, preserved by the vacuum of space for who knew how long. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they moved forward, triggered by motion sensors that somehow still worked after all these years. The corridors stretched ahead like the throat of some enormous beast. Their helmet lights cut through the darkness, revealing walls covered in instructions written in multiple languages. Ryan recognized some of them. English, Chinese, Russian. Languages from old Earth, from before the unification. "This is definitely human," Beth said over the radio, her voice crackling with static. "But I don't understand. We didn't have stations like this back then. We barely made it to Mars." They moved deeper into the station, passing through rooms filled with equipment Ryan didn't recognize. Everything was built heavy and crude, like whoever made it expected it to take a beating. There were blast doors every 50 meters, all sealed tight. Whoever built this place was preparing for war. Then they found it. The chamber was at the heart of the station, protected by 3 separate airlocks and walls that looked thick enough to survive a nuclear blast. The room itself was small, barely larger than a closet. And in the center sat a single stasis pod, still glowing with a soft blue light. The power indicator showed it was active. After thousands of years, it was still running. Inside was a man. A human man frozen in time. He looked to be in his 30s, with short dark hair and a strong jaw. He wore a military uniform that Ryan had only seen in history books. The fabric was dark blue with patches on the shoulders. One patch showed an eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch. Another showed flags from old Earth nations. But the one that made Ryan's blood run cold was the name tag sewn above the chest pocket. United Earth Space Force, Captain James Mitchell, 2187. Beth's voice came through the radio, shaking. "That's impossible. Ryan, that date? That's 200 years before first contact. Humans didn't have a space force back then. We didn't have stasis technology. We barely made it off Earth." Ryan stepped closer to the pod, studying the frozen face through the frosted glass. Captain James Mitchell looked peaceful, like he was just sleeping. But something in his expression, even frozen as it was, looked tired. Haunted. Like he'd seen something terrible before he went to sleep. Wake him up, Ryan said. Beth turned to stare at him. Sir, we don't know what. Wake him up, Lieutenant. I want answers. This man has been floating out here for 5,000 years. He deserves to open his eyes again. And we need to know what he was running from. Beth hesitated, then nodded. She moved to the control panel on the side of the pod and began working through the activation sequence. The pod hummed to life louder now. Frost began melting from the glass. Inside, Ryan could see ice crystals forming in the air as the ancient technology started its revival process. The stasis pod hissed like a dying snake. Steam poured from the seals. Then it opened. Captain James Mitchell's eyes snapped open. He gasped for air like a drowning man breaking the surface of the ocean. His whole body convulsed as his lungs remembered how to breathe. His hand shot out instinctively, reaching for his hip where a weapon should have been. But there was nothing there. Just empty air. Ryan stepped forward slowly, hands raised in a peaceful gesture. Easy, Captain. Easy. You're safe. But you've been asleep for a very long time. James Mitchell's eyes darted around the room, taking in the strange faces, the advanced equipment, the impossible situation. His breathing was rapid and shallow. Ryan could see the panic building behind those eyes. Then the captain spoke, his voice rough from disuse. Where's my crew? Where's the fleet? Ryan exchanged a glance with Beth. How do you tell a man that everyone he ever knew has been dead for 5,000 years? James Mitchell sat in the briefing room with his hands trembling slightly as he held the data pad. The thin piece of glass and metal felt alien in his fingers, nothing like the bulky tablets he remembered from his time. But what showed on the screen was far worse than any unfamiliar technology. He was looking at Earth's history. His Earth. The one he'd left behind to complete his mission. The one he'd promised his wife he'd return to. It was gone. All of it. Buried under centuries of darkness and slow, painful rebuilding. The words on the screen blurred as he read about the collapse. Nuclear winter. Biological warfare. Starvation. The population of Earth had dropped from 8 billion to less than 100 million in just 50 years after he went into stasis. Governments fell. Cities burned. Knowledge was lost. For nearly 3,000 years, humanity clawed its way back from the edge of extinction, forgetting almost everything they once knew. Ryan and Beth stood nearby, giving him space but watching carefully. They brought him coffee, which tasted wrong somehow. Everything tasted wrong. The air smelled wrong. Even gravity felt slightly off, though he knew that was probably just in his head. Operation Prometheus, James said finally, his voice hollow and distant. He set down the data pad because his hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. We detected something coming. Something that wiped out entire star systems. Just gone. Billions of lives erased like they never existed. He paused, trying to find the right words. How do you explain the end of everything to people who'd never faced it? Earth Command picked up the signals about 3 years before I went into stasis. Strange readings from the outer colonies. Ships going silent. Whole planets just stopping all communication. At first, we thought it was some kind of technical failure. Maybe solar flares or equipment malfunction. But then the probe data came back. James stood up and paced the small room. His legs felt weak, but sitting still was impossible. The probes showed us what was happening to those colonies. Nothing left. No buildings. No bodies. No life at all. Just empty worlds stripped down to bedrock. Whatever hit them took everything. The atmosphere. The water. Even the soil. Left nothing but bare rock. That's when Command ordered us to build waypoint stations and establish escape routes. The plan was simple. If Earth fell, humanity would survive somewhere else. We'd scatter to the winds and hope some of us made it. Ryan leaned forward. How long, Captain? How long have I been asleep? James looked at him with eyes that seemed ancient despite his young face. 5,000 years, give or take. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. James closed his eyes and saw his wife's face. Jennifer. Brown hair that always smelled like lavender. A smile that could light up a room. She'd been holding their daughter when he left for the mission. Little Amy, only 3 years old, crying because Daddy had to go away for work. He'd promised them both he'd be back in 6 months. 1 year at most. Jennifer had been dead for nearly 5,000 years. Amy too. Even their great-great-great-grandchildren were dust now. Everyone he'd ever known, ever loved, ever spoken to, gone. His entire world had died while he slept. Captain Mitchell. Beth approached carefully, her voice soft. She could see the pain written across his face. Your mission. What exactly were you running from? James opened his eyes. For a moment he just stared at nothing, lost in memories of a world that no longer existed. Then something shifted in his expression. The grief was still there, but underneath it was something harder. Something that had kept him alive through the worst days of the war. He stood and walked to the station's control panel. His fingers moved across it with muscle memory, touching buttons and switches that the salvage team hadn't been able to figure out. The ancient system responded to his touch like it had been waiting for him. Holographic displays burst to life all around the room, showing star charts and sensor data that was thousands of years old. "We called them Reapers," James said, his voice steadier now. "They came from dark space, from the void between galaxies where nothing should be able to live. They fed on civilization itself. On the energy we created, the life we built. Earth Command scientists figured out they emerge every 2 million years or so. They harvest everything and then go back to sleep, waiting for the galaxy to rebuild." He pulled up grainy footage that made Beth gasp. The image showed massive biomechanical entities, things that looked like a nightmare fusion of machine and living tissue. They were enormous, each one the size of a small city. The footage showed them tearing through human ships like tissue paper, their weapons turning metal into vapor and flesh into nothing. "Earth Command knew we couldn't fight them," James continued. "We barely had working fusion drives. Our weapons were primitive. We were like cavemen trying to fight a nuclear submarine. So instead of fighting, we planned to run. These stations were supposed to be waypoints for the evacuation. Places where refugee ships could stop, refuel, get supplies before moving deeper into unexplored space." Ryan stared at the horrifying images. "But you never evacuated." James shook his head, his jaw tight. "We never got the chance. The Reapers arrived earlier than predicted. Maybe they detected our preparations. Maybe they just got hungry early. We lost contact with Earth within the first week. Then the fleet went silent. Colony by colony, ship by ship, everything just stopped. This station was supposed to be a refuge, a safe harbor for survivors. Instead, it became my tomb." He pulled up another display showing the station's original crew manifest. 200 names. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, all gone now. I was the ranking officer when the attack came. I ordered everyone else into the escape pods. Told them to run as far and fast as they could. Then I set the station to automated defense mode and got into stasis. The plan was simple. If anyone survived, if any human ships came back this way, the station would wake me up. I'd be able to help them. Give them information about the Reapers. Show them where the other stations were. I never thought I'd wake up 5,000 years later," he added quietly. An alarm suddenly pierced the air. The sound was harsh and urgent, nothing like the soft beeps of modern technology. It was an old-fashioned klaxon, the kind designed to wake the dead. The ancient sensors flared to life, displays showing multiple massive contacts emerging from dark space at the edge of the system. Beth's face went pale as she read the sensor data. Her hands flew across her own console, running the numbers again and again, hoping she was wrong. "Commander, those readings. The energy signatures, the mass calculations, the way they move. They match the ones in his data." "Exactly." James stared at the display with his jaw clenched and his hands balled into fists. The sensor screen showed dozens of contacts, each one massive beyond belief. They were coming out of dark space like sharks drawn to blood in the water. And they were heading straight for the station. "They're back," he said. "All personnel, evacuate immediately." Ryan barked into the comm system, his voice cutting through every speaker on the station. "This is not a drill. Everyone back to the ship now." His crew didn't need to be told twice. He could hear boots pounding through corridors as his people scrambled for the airlocks. The alarm kept wailing, that horrible ancient sound that seemed designed to trigger pure panic in anyone who heard it. The sensor displays showed those massive contacts getting closer by the second, moving through space faster than anything that size had any right to move. "Wait." James grabbed Ryan's arm with surprising strength. His fingers dug in hard enough to leave bruises. "Running is exactly what they expect. These things hunt ships in transit. They can move through dark space, appearing anywhere they want. Your vessel won't make it 100 kilometers before they tear it apart." Ryan stared at him, his mind racing. Every instinct screamed at him to get his people to safety, to put distance between them and whatever was coming. But something in James's eyes stopped him cold. This wasn't fear talking. This was experience. The kind of terrible experience that came from watching people die because they made the wrong choice. "Then what do you suggest, Captain?" Ryan asked through gritted teeth. James didn't answer with words. He just turned and sprinted toward the lower decks. Ryan and Beth exchanged a quick glance, then followed. Their boots echoed through ancient corridors as they ran, the emergency lighting casting everything in a hellish red glow. The station groaned around them, its old bones protesting after millennia of silence. They descended 5 levels, taking stairs 2 and 3 at a time. Ryan's lungs burned and his legs ached, but James kept moving like a man possessed. Finally, they reached a corridor that ended in a massive sealed door. It was easily 10 meters tall and just as wide, made from some kind of metal that looked like it could survive a direct hit from a nuclear weapon. James stopped in front of a control panel so old it still had physical buttons instead of touchscreens. The station wasn't just a waypoint, he said, breathing hard as his fingers flew across the ancient interface. He was entering a code sequence from memory, numbers and letters that went on forever. It was an armory. The doors groaned like a dying giant. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling as ancient hydraulics, dormant for 5,000 years, struggled to remember their purpose. The seal broke with a hiss of escaping air. Then, slowly, impossibly, the massive doors began to open. What lay beyond took Ryan's breath away. The docking bay was so vast it seemed impossible the station could contain it. It stretched out before them like a cathedral built to worship war itself. And there, shrouded in darkness and floating in its docking cradle, sat a warship that made Ryan's blood run cold. Beth switched on her helmet light, and the beams swept across the hull. The ship was enormous, easily 3 times the size of Ryan's salvage vessel. But size wasn't what made it terrifying. The hull was scarred and pitted from battle, painted in flat colors designed to absorb sensor scans. Weapons bristled from every surface like the spines of some prehistoric predator. Railgun turrets, missile pods, energy cannons of designs Ryan had never seen before. This wasn't a ship built for exploration or trade or any of the peaceful purposes modern vessels served. This was a weapon designed for one purpose only, to kill. The USF Prometheus, James said quietly, his voice filled with something that might have been pride or grief or both. The last dreadnought of the old Earth fleet. We were supposed to lead the evacuation convoy, protect the civilian ships while they escaped to safe space. Instead, we became the last line of defense when everything fell apart. Beth stared at the warship in horror, her face pale in the reflected light. That's illegal. Ryan, coalition law banned weapons of this magnitude 10,000 years ago. Ships like this were destroyed or disassembled. They're not supposed to exist. Your coalition had the luxury of peace, James replied, already walking toward the ship across a narrow bridge that connected the station to the docking cradle. You built your civilization on 10,000 years of cooperation and trade. We didn't have that. We had 3 years to prepare for extinction. So we built weapons that could crack planets if we needed them to. Ryan stood at the edge of that bridge, staring at the impossible choice in front of him. Every regulation he'd ever learned said to run, to report this to Coalition Command, to let the proper authorities handle it. But those massive contacts on the sensors were getting closer, and something told him there wouldn't be time for proper authorities. He made a decision. Power it up, Ryan said. Beth turned to stare at him like he'd lost his mind. Commander, we can't just. That's an order, Lieutenant. Ryan's voice was hard as steel. He looked at James, who was already halfway across the bridge. Can you fly this thing? James glanced back, and for the first time since waking up, something like a real smile crossed his face. Commander, I was born to fly this thing. This ship and I went through hell together. We know each other's moves. They crossed the bridge and entered the Prometheus through an airlock that groaned as it opened. The interior was dark and cold, preserved by the vacuum of space. But as James moved to the command deck, systems began waking up. Lights flickered on one by one. The air recyclers coughed to life. Deep in the ship's belly, something massive began to stir. The Prometheus roared to life with a sound that shook the entire station. Its ancient reactors burned like captured stars, pouring out more power than Ryan had ever felt in his life. The deck beneath their feet hummed with barely contained violence. Every display came online, showing weapon systems and tactical readouts and targeting computers that made modern technology look like children's toys. James took the captain's chair like he'd never left it. The moment he sat down, the ship seemed to recognize him. Restraints deployed automatically, securing him in place. A helmet descended from above, connecting directly to his neural implant. The ship's AI spoke with a voice like distant thunder, ancient and powerful. Captain Mitchell. Threat Protocol Omega active. Awaiting orders. Engage defensive posture, James commanded, his voice steady and calm. Protect the station and all allied vessels. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Show these things what happens when they threaten humanity. Ryan stood beside the captain's chair, gripping a railing as the Prometheus detached from its cradle. Through the view screen he could see those massive contacts breaching the system's edge, dozens of them, each one the stuff of nightmares. We're really doing this. James glanced at him. You don't have to stay, Commander. This is my fight. Get your people to safety if you can. Someone's got to keep you from doing anything too crazy, Ryan replied with a grim smile. Besides, I didn't come all this way just to run from ghosts. If these things wiped out old Earth, then maybe it's time someone showed them that humanity doesn't stay down. The Reapers breached the defensive perimeter, and the battle for humanity's forgotten legacy began. The Prometheus shuddered violently as the first Reaper beam carved across its shields. The entire ship groaned, metal screaming under stress it hadn't felt in 5,000 years. Sparks flew from overhead panels. The lights flickered. Ryan grabbed onto a support beam to keep from being thrown across the bridge. James's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, his fingers dancing over buttons and switches that responded to his touch like old friends. Firing solutions appeared in his mind like second nature, calculations he'd done 1,000 times before. His eyes tracked 3 different displays at once, processing information faster than Ryan thought humanly possible. Railguns target lead vessel. Fire. The ship bucked as the massive weapons unleashed hell. Metal slugs the size of cars accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, crossing the distance between the Prometheus and the Reaper in less than a heartbeat. The slugs punched through the creature's organic armor like it was paper. The Reaper shrieked across all frequencies, a sound that made Ryan's teeth ache even through the shields. Then it exploded in a brilliant flash of blue fire that lit up the void like a dying star. Direct hit. Beth called from the sensor station, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and excitement. But Commander, there are dozens more out there. We can't possibly fight them all. We need to. We don't need to win, James interrupted, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. We just need to survive long enough. Another Reaper dove at them from above, its massive form blotting out the stars. Ryan could see it clearly now through the view screen. It looked like something pulled from a nightmare, all twisted metal and pulsing organic tissue fused together in ways that made no sense. Weapons that glowed with sickly green light jutted from its hull. James rolled the massive dreadnought with impossible grace, moving the ship like it weighed nothing instead of millions of tons. The maneuver brought the dorsal weapons to bear, massive cannons that had been silent for millennia. Nuclear-pumped lasers carved through the void, beams of coherent light hot enough to vaporize anything they touched. The Reaper tried to dodge, but it was too slow. The beams sliced through its center mass, cutting the creature cleanly in half. Both pieces spun away into the darkness, leaking fluids that froze instantly in the vacuum. Ryan watched in awe and terror. This was warfare from an age his people had forgotten, from a time when humanity fought for survival instead of profit margins. It was brutal and efficient and desperate. Every move James made was designed to kill as quickly as possible. There was no elegance here, no careful diplomacy. Just raw violence delivered with surgical precision. The battle raged around them. The Prometheus wove through the swarm of Reapers like a dancer, its weapons never stopping. Railguns fired. Missiles streaked through space. Energy weapons lit up the darkness. And with each passing second, more Reapers died. But more kept coming, pouring out of dark space like an endless tide. Captain, I'm detecting a pattern in their formation, Beth said, her eyes locked on her displays. They're all oriented toward a central point. Some kind of command node, maybe. They're not moving randomly. They're being coordinated. James pulled up the tactical display with a swipe of his hand. The hologram showed the entire battlefield, dozens of Reaper contacts swirling around them. And there, at the center of the swarm like a spider at the heart of its web, was something massive. A Reaper 3 times larger than the others, pulsing with stolen energy that made the sensors scream. That's the Prime, James said, his jaw clenching. The command ship. Kill it and the rest scatter. They lose coordination, become easy targets. Ryan looked at the tactical display and felt his stomach drop. We'll never reach it. There must be 20 Reapers between us and that thing. We'd be torn apart before we got halfway there. James was silent for a moment, his eyes distant. Ryan could almost see the calculations running through the captain's mind, weighing options, measuring odds. Then James reached forward and opened a ship-wide channel. All hands, this is Captain Mitchell. I'm uploading a broadcast code to all coalition frequencies. When it transmits, every station like this one will wake up. Every ship will rise. The galaxy won't face this threat alone anymore. The Reapers thought they wiped us out 5,000 years ago. Let's show them they were wrong. He turned to Ryan, and there was something heavy in his expression. Something final. But someone needs to reach that prime. The Prometheus has one weapon left that we never used. An antimatter ram. The original design was for planetary defense, for cracking open worlds if we needed to. We never tested it. Never needed to. But it'll work. It has to work. Ryan understood immediately and his blood ran cold. That's a one-way trip, Captain. It's the only way, James replied quietly. One ship, one life to save everyone else. That's a trade I can live with. Or die with, I guess. Beth accessed the ancient files with shaking hands, her face pale in the blue light of her screen. Captain, according to these records, there are 43 stations like this one scattered across the galactic rim. If your broadcast works, if they all wake up. It'll work, James said with absolute certainty. He initiated the sequence, and somewhere deep in the ship's systems, ancient transmitters powered up and began broadcasting across every frequency humanity had ever used. Across the galaxy, separated by thousands of light years, ancient stations began receiving the signal. Their computers stirred from long sleep. Their reactors ignited. And their warships, patient and deadly, began to wake. Ryan stood up from where he'd been gripping the railing. Evacuate the ship. Get to the escape pods. That's an order, Captain Mitchell. With respect, Commander, James said with a sad smile, I don't take orders from salvage crews. This is my fight. It always has been. I should have died with my crew 5,000 years ago. This is just me keeping a promise I made back then. Then we fight it together, Ryan said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. I'm not leaving. You want to make a heroic sacrifice? Fine. But you're not doing it alone. James looked at the young commander and saw echoes of the soldiers he'd once served with. Men and women who knew the odds but fought anyway. Who stood their ground when running would have been smarter. Humanity really did survive, didn't it? Because people like you made sure we could, Ryan replied. The Prometheus turned toward the Prime Reaper and charged into the heart of the swarm, its weapons blazing, carrying two men toward their destiny. The dreadnought's hull screamed like a living thing as Reaper weapons tore through armor plating that had survived 5,000 years of waiting. Metal peeled away in sheets. Atmosphere vented into space through dozens of breaches. Fires bloomed across multiple decks, flames spreading through corridors that hadn't seen life in millennia. The ship was dying, falling apart around them piece by piece. But it was taking dozens of Reapers with it. Every shot James fired found its mark. Every missile launched struck true. The Prometheus had been built for one purpose, and even after all these years, it remembered how to kill. Reapers exploded around them in flashes of blue and green fire, their death screams echoing across every frequency. But there were always more coming out of the darkness. Antimatter core at critical mass, the AI announced in that same calm voice, like it was reporting the weather instead of their imminent death. Breach in 30 seconds. James kept both hands locked on the controls, his knuckles white from pressure. He guided the wounded ship through the swarm, dodging attacks that would have vaporized them instantly. The Prime Reaper grew larger in the view screen with every passing second. It was massive beyond belief, a mountain of twisted metal and pulsing organic tissue that seemed to fill half the visible universe. The massive entity seemed to sense his intent, and it turned its full attention toward him. Beams of corrupted energy, weapons that bent the laws of physics, slammed into the Prometheus with enough force to crack moons. The ship lurched sideways. More hull breaches. More fires. The artificial gravity flickered, making everything float for a heartbeat before slamming back down. Warning klaxons screamed from every direction. The view screen showed nothing but damage reports, all of them red, all of them critical. 20 seconds. Ryan, get Beth and anyone else to the escape pods now. James's voice was steel, the tone of a man who'd made his peace with what came next. That's not a request. That's an order. James, we can still. That's an order, Commander. The captain smiled, and there was something peaceful in his expression. Tell Earth when you get back. Tell them we never stopped reaching for the stars. Tell them their ancestors didn't give up when it mattered most. Ryan hesitated, his hand on the back of James's chair. He wanted to argue, wanted to find some other way. But he'd been a commander long enough to recognize when the decision was already made. He grabbed Beth's arm and ran for the escape pods, his boots pounding against deck plates that were already buckling from the heat. Behind them, bulkheads sealed with the heavy thud of metal on metal, the finality of a tomb closing. James heard the locks engage and nodded to himself. At least they'd have a chance. Alone on the bridge, surrounded by flames and failing systems, James opened a final log entry. His fingers were steady on the controls, even as everything around him fell apart. Captain James Mitchell, United Earth Space Force, Prometheus, final entry. His voice was calm, like he was filing a routine report. To whoever finds this recording, to whoever comes after. We were humanity's first reach into the darkness. We met monsters that could devour worlds and we didn't blink. We didn't run. Tell Earth that their ancestors were explorers and warriors both. Tell them we saw the end of everything and chose to fight anyway. Tell them. He paused, thinking of Jennifer and Amy, hoping they'd lived good lives, hoping they'd died peacefully surrounded by family. Tell them we did okay. 10 seconds. The Prime Reaper filled the entire view screen now. James could see details on its hull that made his stomach turn. Pieces of ships, structures from dead civilizations, all fused into its armor like trophies. This thing had killed billions. Trillions maybe. It had erased entire species from existence. But it had never met someone too stubborn to know when he was beaten. 5 seconds. James thought of his daughter. Amy would have been 8 years old when Earth fell? Did she survive the dark times? Did she grow up, have children of her own, live to be old? He hoped so. He hoped the Mitchell line continued somewhere, that some piece of him survived even if his name was forgotten. 2 seconds. The Prime Reaper's weapons charged for a killing blow. James could see the energy building, enough power to turn the Prometheus into atoms. It didn't matter. He was already inside its defenses. Already too close for it to dodge. For humanity, James whispered. The antimatter core breached containment. For one perfect, terrible moment, the Prometheus became a star. The explosion tore a hole in space itself, reality screaming as matter and antimatter annihilated each other completely. The blast wave expanded at nearly the speed of light, a wall of pure destruction that nothing could survive. The Prime Reaper tried to defend itself. Its shields flared, its weapons fired, its entire massive bulk tried to move away. But it was too late. The explosion caught it at point-blank range and simply erased it from existence. One moment it was there, a mountain of stolen life and corrupted energy. The next moment, there was nothing but expanding gases and radiation. The death scream of the Prime echoed across the galaxy. And without its coordination, without its commanding intelligence, the swarm fell apart. The remaining Reapers stopped moving in formation. They scattered, breaking off their attacks, fleeing back into dark space like animals that had just lost their alpha. Within minutes, they were gone, vanished back into the void between galaxies. And across the galaxy, separated by thousands of light years, 43 ancient stations received James Mitchell's final broadcast. Their computers processed the awakening code, verified its authenticity, and executed commands written 5,000 years ago. Reactors that had been cold for millennia ignited. Weapons systems came online. Hangar doors opened. And from each station, a warship launched. Confused explorers and salvage crews found themselves in command of humanity's ancient arsenal, finally understanding why their ancestors survived the dark times when so many others didn't. They'd been left weapons by people who knew that the galaxy wasn't always kind, that sometimes survival meant being ready to fight. Epilogue. Ryan Torres stood at the memorial built where the ancient station once drifted. They'd moved it closer to civilized space, close enough that people could visit without risking the journey to the void. The structure was simple but beautiful, made from metal salvaged from the original station. At its center, protected behind crystal clear as diamond, hung Captain James Mitchell's uniform. The patches were faded, the fabric worn, but you could still read the name tag and the unit insignia. Next to the uniform, a holographic display played James's final log on an endless loop. Ryan had watched it hundreds of times now and it still made his throat tight. A delegation from Earth had arrived that morning. Modern humans who'd spent their lives thinking they were nothing special, just another species in a galaxy full of greater civilizations. But that was changing now. Word had spread about what happened in the void. About the ancient captain who woke from 5,000 years of sleep and saved them all. Commander Torres. An elderly woman approached, her stride strong despite her age. She wore an admiral's uniform of the new Earth Defense Fleet, a military branch that had been formed within weeks of learning about the ancient warships. Her name tag read Admiral Margaret Hayes. Thank you for bringing our ancestor home. Ryan turned to face her. He saved us all, Admiral. Your people built these weapons knowing you might never use them. Built them knowing you might all die before they were ever needed. Why would anyone do that? Margaret smiled, but there was sadness in it. Because sometimes, Commander, survival isn't about being the smartest species or the strongest. It's about being the one too stubborn to quit when things get hard. It's about making sure that even if you fall, the ones who come after you have a fighting chance. She looked at James's uniform. Captain Mitchell made sure we remembered that. Him and the thousands of others who gave everything to leave us weapons we never knew existed. Ryan followed her gaze. The memorial's inscription was carved into the metal, simple words that carried the weight of ages. Captain James Mitchell, United Earth Space Force. He stood between darkness and dawn so humanity could see another sunrise. Ryan straightened and saluted the display. The gesture felt right, even though James had been dead for weeks now, even though his atoms were scattered across light years of space. Across the galaxy, 43 stations stood silent vigil, their ancient warships crewed now by volunteers who understood what they represented. Not aggression but readiness. Not conquest but defense. The Reapers had learned a hard lesson out there in the dark. They'd thought humanity was extinct, thought they'd wiped out the annoying species that refused to just lie down and die. They were wrong. Some prey bites back. And humanity, forged in fire and tempered by 5,000 years of clawing their way back from extinction, had never forgotten how to fight. Margaret placed a hand on the crystal, her fingers spread across the glass as if reaching for the uniform inside. My daughter wants to join the defense fleet. Says she wants to crew one of the ancient ships, learn how to fight the way our ancestors did. What did you tell her? Ryan asked. I told her yes. Margaret's eyes were bright. Because James Mitchell and his generation made a promise. They promised that humanity would survive, would endure, would never give up no matter how dark things got. The least we can do is keep that promise alive. Ryan nodded. In orbit above them, the USF Liberty, one of the newly awakened dreadnoughts, hung in space like a sleeping dragon. It and its sister ships stood ready, their weapons silent but prepared. Just in case the Reapers came back. Just in case something else came out of the dark. Humanity had learned its lesson. They would never be caught unprepared again. And somewhere in the void, in the space between stars, the ghost of Captain James Mitchell could rest easy. His mission was complete. His people were safe. And they remembered. They would always remember. The end.